Hey y'all, it's Miss Summers with your notes today. This is for Honors Biology, February 14th, 2018. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. It's going to be a swell day in biology. If you recall yesterday, we started talking about the basics of cells, reintroducing you to things that you probably learned in middle school, and today it's going to be very similar. We are looking at organelles. So the purpose today, we want, by the end of this, you will know all the major organelles, what they do, and why they are important for the cell. What do they contribute to the cell, and what would happen without them. So let's begin with a little review. Levels of organization. So you do need to have this memorized. We know that level 1, the cell, all living things have one or more cells. The simplest living things may only be made of one cell, but it's a cell nonetheless. All right? If you're a multicellular organism, that is, you are made up of a bunch of cells that have the same job make up tissue. And tissues make up organs make up organ systems, and many organ systems working together make up a single organism. All right, so you are a culmination of all these things, of cells and tissues and organs, all working together to keep you going. So, yay that. So let's start our material today by talking about what organelles are. Yesterday, somebody did mention that organelle, we were talking about eukaryotic cells. Organelle literally means little organ. Little organs, they're little tiny structures that we find in eukaryotes. Remember, prokaryotes, even though prokaryotes are cells, they're very simple. They don't have organelles. All right, so everything we're talking about is going to be, for the most part, only found in eukaryotes. So we have 6 organelles that I absolutely need you to know. And again, these are 6 that you're probably somewhat familiar with. And we will also go over a few other organelles that would be good for you to know, but I'm not going to put as much emphasis on it. All right, so our first major organelle we'll talk about is the nucleus. All right, the nucleus. So the nucleus, in most of your cell diagrams, it's going to look like a little ball. Sometimes it has a dark center. That's the nucleolus. The reason the nucleus is so important is because it holds the DNA of the cell. So remember, DNA, nucleic acid, is all your genetic information. Your DNA is basically instructions on how to make you who you are. So why you have the color hair that you do, why you are as tall as you are, whatnot. All of that is found within your DNA. All right. The nucleus is sometimes called a control center or the brain of the cell because it's where all the instructions are. It is where your instructions are. So without that nucleus, you have no instructions. You don't know what to do. We're going to find eukaryotes in both plant and animal cells. And again, as I mentioned, this dark center here, the nucleolus, is the part of the nucleus that makes ribosomes. And we'll talk about ribosomes here in just a minute. All right, so the nucleus, the brain of the cell. Our next major organelle is the mitochondria, the mighty mitochondria. It kind of looks like a kidney bean with like these weird little folds in it. So the reason the mitochondria is important to us is because it does cellular respiration. Remember, one of those characteristics of life is that living things undergo metabolism. They take food and turn it into energy. Well, that's exactly what the mitochondria does. Takes food and oxygen, makes it energy. We're going to find these in all eukaryotes, so that's going to be plant and animal. And because it makes energy in the form of ATP, we'll talk about that more when we get to respiration, we like to think of the mitochondria as a power plant, or we might call it the mighty mitochondria. That's what I learned it as in the 7th grade. That's still something I remember. The mighty mitochondria makes energy. Now, another interesting observation about the mitochondria is that it has this folded membrane. This is called the cristae. I don't care if you know that. It does not matter to me. But I do want you to know that this folded membrane is important because it increases surface area. All right, this membrane is where the actual chemical reactions occur. So if you fold it, you can fit more. And if you can fit more, that means more reactions can happen. So folded membranes are very important to living things. All right, this is a common theme you'll see throughout the rest of this year. Increased surface area equals more efficient. That's the mighty mitochondria. Our next organelle isn't necessarily a membrane-bound organelle. This is going to be found in all cells, both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. But this is the cell membrane. So you can think of the cell membrane as a gate or a fence. This separates cell from the rest of the world, from the outside. All right. It is made of what's called a phospholipid bilayer. So remember, lipids, fats. You see these little tails, that's the fatty part of it. It's also comprised of proteins and carbohydrate chains. So these are, again, going back to all those organic compounds. That's why those are important. They form this membrane. The reason this is so vital to the cell is because it controls what goes in and out. So think about the gases that are involved when you breathe. All right, all your cells require oxygen. They require oxygen in order to do respiration in the mitochondria. Well, oxygen has to be able to get through this membrane. Likewise, respiration produces carbon dioxide. And we don't want a whole lot of carbon dioxide, so some of that carbon dioxide will leave the cell, and that again happens through the cell membrane. So the cell membrane controls what goes in and out. Our next organelle, the chloroplast. Ooh, the chloroplast, how fun. So we find this in plant cells generally. Some protists will have it, but it is lacking in animal cells. We don't have these, unfortunately. We don't. And the chloroplast is important is because, or the reason the chloroplast is important is because it is where photosynthesis occurs. So light energy and carbon dioxide turns into food. All right? So usually we'll talk about the chloroplast and mitochondria hand in hand because they both have something to do with energy. Energy goes into the chloroplast and food comes out. The mitochondria is the exact opposite. Food goes into the mitochondria and energy comes out. Again, we'll talk more about the photosynthesis reaction in a few weeks, so just hold tight on that. But the chloroplast, again, I want you to observe, you see these little stacks? They look kind of like coins or pancakes or whatever you want to call them. These are called thylakoids. Again, we'll talk about that more in detail later. But the thylakoids, the purpose, this is where the actual photosynthesis reaction takes place. More surface area, more reactions. All right? More is better when you're talking about chemical reactions. We want photosynthesis to happen a lot because you're getting food that way. You want respiration to happen a lot. That's how you get your energy, all right? So, easy way to remember chloroplasts and how to identify them, especially if you have a color diagram. These are always going to be green. That word chloro is a stem that means green. We talked about that yesterday, all right? And when we talk about photosynthesis, we'll talk about why it's green and not any other color, all right? So, chloroplasts, only plant cells, photosynthesis. Our next organelle are the ribosomes. All right, so these are not necessarily membrane bound, so we're going to find them in pro and eukaryote, all of them. And these are important because they do protein synthesis. So they get information, the ribosomes get instructions from the nucleus. All right, remember the nucleus has the instructions. The ribosome gets that and then takes those instructions and turns them into something useful for the cell. All right. So proteins are how living organisms express traits, all right? That's why your hair is a certain color. That's why your eyes are a certain color. Those are proteins that do that, all right? So an easy way to remember, protein synthesis happens at the ribosome. RIB spells ribs. And when I think about ribs, I know that's a good source of protein. Ribs, protein, ribs. See what I did there? Boom. Our last major organelle we want to talk about is the cell wall. So we find cell walls in prokaryotes, so those are things like bacteria, and plant cells only. All right, animal cells do not have cell walls. Now, just like we talked about yesterday, and if you look at this diagram, it's pretty easy to see, the cell wall provides structure and protection for the cell. So it's going to be more rigid than that membrane, and it's going to keep things out. In plants, cell walls are made of cellulose. And again, let's throw back to those organic compounds. OSE, what's that mean? It means sugars. Cellulose is a type of carbohydrate. There you go. All right, so we just connected all that together. So cell walls protect. Walls protect. All right. So those are your major 6 organelles that I absolutely need you to devote your studies to. But let's talk about some of the other organelles just to acquaint ourselves with them if you haven't already been acquainted. Some other ones, vacuoles. So vacuoles are these right here. So here's one in a plant cell. Here's a little one in an animal cell. In plants, they're much larger, and in animals, they're smaller. They store things like water, food, and waste. And in a plant, that's really important because you need water for photosynthesis. So that would explain why you have a large vacuole. So vacuoles hold things. The Golgi apparatus, which is super fun. It is this, again, folded structure. It's generally by the nucleus, not always. It is sort of like a post office. It packs things up and it moves things. So like an Amazon distribution center of the cell. So your proteins, once they're good to go, they get wrapped up here and sent on their way. The lysosome, our next one, lysosomes are these little round things. They're not super standoutish. But lysosome, look at that stem, lyse. Lyse means to break down or to kill, like Lysol. So these are going to break down things that the cell doesn't need, like waste or toxins or things that are broken or dead. That way it can reuse material. So lyse, break down, lyse. Right. The endoplasmic reticulum is a network of tubes that folds and packages proteins. They go to the Golgi apparatus. There's 2 versions of the endoplasmic reticulum. Again, you can just abbreviate it ER. The rough endoplasmic reticulum, the reason it's called rough is because there's ribosomes attached to it, so it looks bumpy. And the smooth, and again, that is just lacking in ribosomes. And our last organelle I want to acquaint you with are our centrioles. These are these tubular, is that a word? I don't know. These tube-like structures. They kind of look like licorice sticks or straws. These are found only in animal cells, and they help in cell division. They are going to help that cell divide and pull genetic material towards these new cells. Again, more on them when we get to mitosis. Okay. And so those are all the organelles I'm going to tell you today. There are some more specific ones like the nucleolus, the nuclear membrane, all that fun stuff. Don't worry about that. That's not important to you at this point in time. It will be important to you later, especially if you go to AP biology. But I do want to bring this discussion back to form and function. All right, we talked about form and function with proteins and organic compounds, that the shape of your protein determines what you do. The same thing applies to cells. All right, if a cell has a lot of a certain organelle that does a certain job, chances are that cell has a particular function to that organism. All right, so let's think about a cell with several chloroplasts. Those are going to be like the green leaves on trees or plants or grasses. All right, those cells do photosynthesis. That's its job. All right, not all cells of a tree have that. All right, if you look at the roots of a tree, there are no chloroplasts because they would be useless there. You're only going to find that in the leaves. All right, a cell that requires a lot of energy is going to have lots of mitochondria so that it can do that. There is, trying to think, what is it? There are certain types of fish that live in the ocean. Marlin? Yeah, let's go with marlin. It might not be marlin. It's one of those sports fish. But they have organs in their eyes that can actually heat up the tissues around it. All right, and that helps contribute to them being able to swim very quickly. Well, they need a lot of mitochondria to do that. You need a lot of energy to generate that kind of heat. A cell that's specialized for storage, like the roots of a tree. All right, that's where they store food, excess food. Probably going to have a lot of vacuoles to hold all that. All right. So, again, whatever form you have, all right, whatever organelles you have is going to determine the specific job of that cell. So, I will see you all tomorrow, assuming nothing silly happens, and I hope you have a super great rest of your Wednesday.